Choose between the person you love or your future? This was the question I answered for Wilfred Barlow on New Year's Eve 8 years ago. At that time, the usually proud Wilfred was on his knees in the snow, clutching the hem of my coat, begging me not to leave. I remained unmoved, my eyes cold and distant. Wilfred, you don't understand. The right person will be part of my future, not separate from it. That year, Wilfred's career and love life both crumbled. I never imagined that 8 years later, we would meet again at a bidding meeting for a major contract. I was there as a competitor, trying to win a project that could save my struggling company. And there was Wilfred, sitting in the chairman's seat, looking down at me from his position of power. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. As the bidding meeting concluded, the crowd dispersed. I sent my assistant back to the office and hurried to the underground car park to intercept Wilfred's car. He seemed to have anticipated my arrival, showing no surprise in his eyes, yet he didn't initiate any conversation. Wilfred. I hesitated, unsure how to begin. Ms. Farley from Farley Group, isn't it? Is there something I can help you with? His businesslike demeanor was as cold as if nothing had ever happened between us. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the pain in my heart. Yes. Mr. Barlow, would it be possible for your company to give Farley Group a fair chance to compete for the project? If fair competition was ensured, I was 80% confident we could secure the project. Our group's bidding process has always been open and transparent. I'm not sure what Ms. Farley is implying. Looking at Wilfred's serious and cold expression, I smiled self-mockingly. I knew him too well, he was never one to stick strictly to business. Using this tactic to fob me off was just his way of testing my limits. Mr. Barlow may not understand, but Wilfred should be very clear about my concerns. Oh. Wilfred raised an eyebrow, revealing a rare smile of interest. So, in what capacity are you speaking to me now? As Ms. Farley from Farley Group, or as Winifred, my ex-girlfriend who once betrayed me? Through his smile, I could see the gritted teeth of hatred. Good. Where there's hate, there's love. I still had a chance. I opened the passenger door and sat down directly. Whichever you prefer. Wilfred sneered. Winifred, you're not naive enough to think there's any old affection left between us, are you? Of course not, but I beg you, keep business and personal grudges separate. Take it out on me if you must, but please don't target Farley Group, all right? His long fingers tapped rhythmically on the steering wheel as time ticked by. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I was certain he wouldn't easily give up this perfect opportunity for revenge. Fine, he said, looking at me with contempt. As long as you're willing to pay the price. The limited edition jet black Maybach roared to life, startling me into reflexively gripping my seatbelt. The exorbitantly priced luxury car raced down the motorway, attracting the attention of countless car enthusiasts. After a long silence, I finally couldn't help but speak up. Where are you taking me? Your husband can't afford a car like this, can he? Your taste in men seems to be getting worse and worse. The cutting words were at odds with his refined demeanor. I had steeled myself countless times, telling myself to stay calm and let him humiliate me however he wanted, as long as it made him happy. But my mouth was always quicker than my brain. Mr. Barlow, you seem awfully concerned about my private life. Do you still have feelings for me? We had loved each other for 5 years, and we both knew exactly what words would hurt the other most precisely. Sure enough, Wilfred's face immediately darkened. But he didn't respond to me, instead using Bluetooth to call his assistant. Hello, Mr. Barlow. Cancel the 5 o'clock meeting and book me a room at Westminster Hotel. After hanging up, he gave me a cruel smile. My heart sank, and I had a bad feeling. I hear the CEO of Farley Group and his wife are deeply in love. No wonder you were able to swallow your pride and come beg me. Wilfred's words reminded me that I used to be even more arrogant than him. Sleep with me for one night, then I'll send the video to your husband, and I'll leave Farley Group alone. It was like a bolt from the blue, like being struck by lightning. He was certain I wouldn't accept. He just wanted to throw my dignity on the ground and trample it, then watch me lose my temper or grovel. But he was wrong. The proud and arrogant Winifred had died that night 8 years ago. All right, I agreed to his demand. The Maybach suddenly screeched to a halt by the roadside. Wilfred's face grew even darker, and the atmosphere instantly plummeted to freezing. After a long while, I finally heard him say, "Winifred, when did you become such a cheap whore?" In the presidential suite of Westminster Hotel. Wilfred Barlow irritably loosened his tie, looking at me with undisguised disgust. "I'll give you one last chance. You can still leave now." I removed my coat expressionlessly and began unbuttoning my blouse. "No need. I'm not one to flee at the last minute." Crash! An expensive crystal glass was ruthlessly smashed, its fragments scattered across the floor. "Fine then." Having vented his anger, he seemed to calm down and opened his arms. "So you must know how to please a man, right?" Ignoring the insult in his words, I walked over to help him undress. He suddenly grabbed my hand, so forcefully that it left red marks. "You love him that much? To help him keep his company, you'd let your dignity be trampled on and throw away the reputation you care about most. Winifred Farley, you used to be a refined egoist. How have you become such a lovesick fool now? Wilfred." I smiled at him, calling his name for the first time in 8 years. He was visibly taken aback. I took the opportunity to break free from his grip and continued gently unbuttoning his shirt. Personal interests are trivial in the face of a company's life or death. Even without looking up, I could clearly feel his gaze on me growing increasingly sharp. Trading favors for business interests, I'm well versed in this. You needn't worry about me. I removed his shirt and lightly traced my fingers across his muscular chest. But Mr. Barlow, perhaps you should consider whether your fiancée might be hurt if she found out about our affair. Wilfred also sensed this was a contest. Whoever lost composure first would lose. He reined in his fierce aura and instead put his arm around my waist. As Miss Farley said, playing along is common in business. She'll understand. I wrapped my arms around his neck, smiling intimately. How fortunate Mr. Barlow is to have such an understanding fiancé. Wilfred smiled sardonically. Of course. I've learned my lesson when choosing a woman now, obedience is key. Oh, is that so? I smiled faintly, brazenly nuzzling his neck with the tip of my nose. His gaze on me grew increasingly profound. I knew well this was the prelude to losing control. However, a phone ring abruptly shattered the ambiguous atmosphere. He pushed me away without hesitation. "Hello?" After adjusting my clothes, I casually leaned against the sofa watching him take the call. "What?" "Stop her." I saw shock and fury on his face. "It was you?" I smiled brightly, openly admitting it. It was. People's true nature really never changes. You're still as ruthless as ever, using any means necessary to achieve your goals. "I'm impressed," he said through gritted teeth. "Thank you for the compliment, Mr. Barlow. Shall we continue?" "Get out." "About the project." "Get out." Then on behalf of Farley Group, I thank Mr. Barlow in advance. Having achieved my goal, I picked up my bag and strode out. As long as Mr. Barlow keeps his promise, I will never appear before Miss Collington. "Get out!" Amidst his furious roar, I left triumphantly. In this contest, I seemed to have won a great victory. But no one knew that in the taxi on my way back, I cried like a madwoman. Ring ring. My mobile phone rang. I waited until it had almost stopped before pressing the answer button. The person on the other end hesitated before speaking, as I hadn't said anything for a while. "Are you all right?" I tried to calm myself down, making an effort to sound normal. "I'm fine. Don't worry, the project won't be affected." The caller seemed to want to say more, but held back. After a long pause. "Glad you're okay. Come back soon." Just as I hung up, another call came through from an unknown number. "Hello? It's you, isn't it, Winifred Farley?" That voice. I'll never forget it as long as I live. It's haunted my nightmares countless times over the past 2,000 nights. Fighting to control my shaking hand, I pressed the record button. "Miss Collington, you dare to keep entangling with Wilfred Barlow. Seems you've forgotten the lesson from 8 years ago. Forget? How could I possibly? He's really driven me into a corner, I sighed helplessly. Miss Collington, could you please try to persuade him to leave Farley Group alone? If he backs off, I promise I'll disappear forever. Disappear? Huh. What did you promise me before? Winifred Farley, don't think I don't know what you're up to. If you dare provoke him, you'll have to accept the punishment. With that threat, she hung up. Immediately after, a message notification popped up. When I opened it, a video I never wanted to see again in my life appeared before my eyes. The video showed 5 men and 1 woman in an unspeakable scene. Bronte Collington, she really is ruthless. I closed my eyes, thinking about the recent events, feeling mentally and physically exhausted. When I arrived home, Aubrey was waiting for me with the lights on, his eyes full of concern. You must be worn out. I've made some bird's nest soup, have some before you sleep, he said while handing me slippers and a warm towel. Just as the outside world said, we appeared to be a naturally loving couple. My gaze swept across the dining table, landing on his phone screen that hadn't been turned off in time. A video was still playing. I pretended not to notice as he hurriedly switched off the screen. You're tired from work too. Why didn't you let the housekeeper make it? I asked casually. Aubrey replied eagerly, she doesn't make it as well as I do. Try some. But I didn't have any appetite. I'll eat after I freshen up. You should go to bed, don't wait up for me, I said before heading to the bathroom. When I came out, the dining room light was still on, but Aubrey was gone. I stared at the soup on the table for 2 seconds, then without hesitation, poured it down the toilet. As I returned to the guest room, I noticed the master bedroom was empty but the light was on. I switched it off before going to the guest room to sleep. I'm not sure how long I slept, but in my drowsy state, I felt someone climb into bed in the dark. Then, cool arms embraced me from behind. I stiffened, silently forcing myself to breathe normally so he wouldn't realize I was pretending to sleep. My heart inexplicably raced, whether from awkwardness or fear, I couldn't tell. Seemingly sensing my tension, he gently rubbed my back to soothe me. Surprisingly, I found myself relaxing, gradually drifting off into a deep sleep, feeling oddly secure. In the middle of the night, I awoke from a light sleep and gazed at Aubrey's handsome face as he slept soundly. My eyes grew pensive. I hadn't informed Bronte Collington. Could it be you, then? Aubrey Arkwright. Early the next morning, warm sunlight streamed into the bedroom, waking me up. I instinctively glanced to my side, but there was no one there. Everything from last night felt like a dream I had imagined. As if possessed, I unlocked my phone and took a look, my heart sinking. The video and audio recordings were gone. I stared at the ultrasound report in my hand, my emotions in turmoil. The words 8 weeks pregnant on the paper seemed to mock me. I was pregnant. How was this possible? 8 years ago, the diagnosis report clearly stated I could never conceive again. Suddenly, my assistant knocked and entered. Miss Farley, Barlow Group has responded. Mr. Barlow is willing to meet, but he has one condition: he requests that you dine with him alone. What do you think? That's fine, I replied. I knew it. Someone as proud and arrogant as Wilfred Barlow wouldn't give up so easily. The venue for the dinner was chosen by Wilfred's Star Bistro, the place where I had taken him 13 years ago when I received my first year-end bonus. We once dreamed that as long as the restaurant didn't close down, we would celebrate our anniversary here every year. How ironic and laughable that things have changed so much. To show my sincerity, I arrived an hour early. But when Wilfred came, he not only brought his friends but also Bronte Collington. Winifred Farley? How dare you show your face here? Quentin Nesbitt was immediately on guard upon seeing me. He had witnessed the most loving times between Wilfred and me, as well as Wilfred's most miserable state after our breakup. I glanced at Wilfred, who was attentively pulling out a chair for Bronte. I invited her here, he said. Quentin widened his eyes in disbelief. After glancing at Bronte's composed expression twice, he couldn't help but lower his voice to ask, "Why did you invite her to Bronte's birthday?" Wilfred sat down next to Bronte, looked up at me with a sarcastic smile that didn't reach his eyes. To liven things up, of course. It's a birthday party, we need something interesting. He made a casual please gesture, inviting me to sit down. I stood stiffly in place, not moving. Bronte snuggled into Wilfred's arms, looking at me provocatively and taunting in a coquettish voice. Darling said Miss Farley is here to beg for something, but it doesn't look like it to me. I tactfully walked over and poured her a drink with my head lowered submissively. Wilfred's friends, who all despised me, naturally wouldn't miss this opportunity to kick me while I was down. Well, Winifred Farley, weren't you quite arrogant before? A few years have passed, and now you've learned to serve others? Some people's pride doesn't match their moral standards. They'll do anything for money. They took turns trampling on my dignity. But I felt nothing inside. Wilfred, it's a good thing you didn't tell her your true identity back then. Otherwise, she could have kept up the act for another 5 years. Missing the chance to be the CEO's wife for a director position, I bet she's regretting it to death now. Indeed, who could have imagined that the son of Barlow Group's chairman would endure so many years of hardship starting his own business? She wasn't after the director position. She clearly wanted to sell herself for a good price while she was young and pretty. Too bad the old man didn't even want her. Everyone burst into laughter, except for Wilfred, who silently took a sip of whiskey, lost in thought. Someone deliberately bumped into me, causing the whiskey in my hand to spill onto Wilfred's leather shoes. Someone else pushed me hard from behind. I fell clumsily to the ground but instinctively protected my belly. "You clumsy fool, hurry up and clean Mr. Barlow's shoes," someone sneered. Compared to 8 years ago, this humiliation was nothing. If it could make Wilfred happy, I didn't mind pretending to be mortified. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Barlow." "I'll clean them right away," I said meekly. As I was about to use my sleeve to wipe his leather boots, he suddenly gripped my chin, forcing me to look up. "Miss Farley, don't you think kneeling would show more sincerity?" Wilfred said coldly. Countless gleeful gazes focused on me. The sharp smell of alcohol made me nauseous, but I held it back, though a few tears escaped. A flicker of panic seemed to cross Wilfred's eyes, quickly replaced by fury. "Ha! How long did I kneel for you that snowy night? And now you can't even handle paying back a little interest?" I wrenched free from his grip and lowered my head, afraid they would notice something was off. "Of course, sir." I placed one knee on the ground, steadying myself. Before I could catch my breath, his icy voice came from above. "The other knee too." I hadn't come to my senses until the Maybach was speeding along the intercity road under the cover of night. I didn't end up fully kneeling down after all. Wilfred Barlow, for some unfathomable reason, dragged me away in front of everyone, leaving Bronte Collington behind. As I watched the speedometer climb higher and higher on the dashboard, my heart raced faster and faster. "Are you mad? This isn't a motorway." He had actually pushed the speed to 80 miles per hour on an intercity road. "Dropping the act now, are we? I thought you weren't afraid of anything, but it seems you do fear death." I could feel the veins in my temple throbbing. Rubbish! Who isn't afraid of dying? If you're tired of living, go kill yourself, but don't drag me into it. The cold moonlight fell on Wilfred's chiseled profile, adding an eerie chill to his sardonic smile. "But you, of all people, deserve to die the most." I could hear the seething hatred in his words, and an inexplicable panic gripped my heart. As the surroundings grew increasingly desolate, my unease intensified. Surely this madman wasn't planning to take me to some remote area to finish me off and bury me on the spot. "Where are you taking me?" Wilfred didn't answer, instead flooring the accelerator. In the end, I was fortunate enough not to die in a high-speed car accident. But the car did come to a stop in a cemetery on the outskirts of the city. "Get out," he said. His tone was as cold as ice, perfectly matching the eerie surroundings. At this moment, I felt even more like a lamb to the slaughter than I had at the dinner table earlier, completely at his mercy. But just then, my phone rang. The caller, Aubrey Arkwright. I could feel Wilfred's piercing gaze on me without even looking. As I hesitated whether to answer, Wilfred snatched the phone and hung up abruptly. He roughly pulled me out of the passenger seat and strode towards the depths of the cemetery. "Ouch! Slow down!" Unable to break free from his grip, I had to jog to keep up with his pace to avoid falling. The vast graveyard was shrouded in darkness, an eerie silence permeating the air. Yet I wasn't afraid, for those lying here were loved ones others could only dream of seeing again. A heartless woman like you can feel pain? Wilfred suddenly stopped and shoved me down in front of a gravestone. The fall nearly hit my belly, successfully angering me. What are you doing? Wilfred glared at me intently. The one you should kneel before isn't me, it's him. I realized then that he wasn't looking at me, but at the gravestone behind me. Turning around in shock, I faintly made out the inscription in the moonlight, "Here lies Mabel Barlow, beloved son." I seemed to see that shocking blood red blooming again on my dress, a gruesome sight. Helplessly watching my own child turn into blood and slowly drain from my body. No one understands that bone-deep pain better than I do. Tears burst forth as I opened my mouth wide. One hand caressing my warm belly, the other tightly hugging the gravestone as I wept silently. My child, have you come back? Have you forgiven Mummy? Wilfred Barlow yanked me away forcefully, roaring. Don't touch him, you don't deserve to. Don't touch me, you don't deserve to. I cried out hysterically, clutching my stomach tightly. Wilfred was visibly stunned, seemingly frightened by my madness. You're pregnant? What are you trying to do? I stared at him warily. Ha! These 8 years have been miserable for me, yet someone like you gets to have a happy marriage and perfect family? How is that fair? I didn't understand. He was born with everything most people could never attain in a lifetime. Yet here he was acting resentful in front of me. Winifred Farley, I won't let you have your way. I promise you that. He left those harsh words and turned to leave. I called Aubrey to come pick me up. When he arrived, he held me tightly in his arms without asking anything. But I caught a faint scent of perfume on him. The same perfume Bronte Collington was wearing tonight. St. Mary's Hospital, Oncology Ward. The television in the ward was broadcasting news of the engagement between the young heir of Barlow Group and Miss Collington. Thank you, Winnie. You're so kind. The little girl on the hospital bed happily played with the toy I had brought her, not forgetting to thank me sweetly. I couldn't resist reaching out to pinch her adorable little cheek. Be good, Dulcie. I'll come see you again next time. The little girl nodded obediently. Just as I walked out of the ward, I encountered Dulcie's father. He seemed surprised to see me and hesitated to speak. Bronte Collington was furious last night, he said. I paused mid-step, finding it rather amusing. Bronte Collington must have been absolutely livid. Yet this morning she still had to put on a sweet act with Wilfred Barlow to announce their engagement to the media. Such restraint was quite out of character for her. She's probably plotting how to deal with you now. You should be careful. I didn't need his reminder to know that, given Miss Collington's vengeful nature. She wouldn't be merciful in her retaliation. I know. I have an appointment, so I'll be going now. After leaving the hospital, I turned and entered a nearby tea house. 10 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia. Although she had successful stem cell treatment many years ago, it recently relapsed. Without prompt surgery, I feared she wouldn't make it through the year. However, the surgery only had a 30% success rate. If Dr. Edmund Ingoldsby from Germany could perform it himself, the success rate could reach 50%. Dr. Ingoldsby was visiting England to study recently. He happened to be free this afternoon, so I had arranged to meet him at this tea house. The waitress led me to the designated private room. I pushed open the door and walked in, only to find that waiting for me was not Dr. Ingoldsby, but Wilfred Barlow. Why is it you? I frowned, wondering what he was up to this time. He said, Dr. Ingoldsby won't see you without my approval. Having grown up relying solely on my mother, his control over Dr. Ingoldsby meant he had control over my lifeline. He once prided himself on his flawless strategies, yet I was the only one who had ever bested him. Now, of course, he wanted to settle that score with interest. Go on then, tell me how you plan to torment me to satisfy your grudge, Mr. Barlow. I said as I sat across from him, with an air of reckless abandon. He pushed a document on the table towards me. I glanced at it and saw the words divorce agreement written in bold at the top. Divorce Aubrey and terminate the pregnancy, he said. And if I refuse? I asked. His gaze darkened, his entire demeanor becoming sharp and cold. A mother you've relied on since childhood or an unformed child, everyone knows which to choose. You don't have the luxury of being stubborn. I thought to myself, if only I still had a choice. Wilfred, you underestimate a mother's love for her child. My answer clearly displeased him. Winifred, don't treat this as a negotiation, and don't test my limits, he said. If you dare to choose the child, I'll send Dr. Ingoldsby back to Germany immediately. I certainly believed he would do it. But the bargaining chip in his hand no longer held any meaning for me. I picked up my bag and stood up. It's always been you who puts a price tag on everything, treating it like a game of business, I said. I'm tired. I don't want to play along anymore. As I was leaving, Wilfred Barlow couldn't help but chase after me. Do you love Aubrey Arkwright so much that you'd abandon your own mother for his child? He asked. I keenly picked up on the key information in his words, my gaze falling on his hand. This hand had once led me across the beautiful countryside of Britain. But now it had become an unbreakable entanglement of love and hate. What do you really care about? The child, or Aubrey? I asked. He was visibly taken aback, as if I had struck a nerve. This gave me a sense of vengeful satisfaction. I sneered, "Oh, Wilfred, do you hate me or love me?" He yanked me back, forcefully pressing me into the armchair. He leaned in, his arms braced on the armrests, bringing his face close to mine. The sharp sense of intimidation left me with nowhere to retreat. My heart was racing, but I feigned composure, glaring back defiantly, unwilling to lose the battle of wills. Does love or hate matter? He asked. He gripped my chin, holding me completely still. In these 8 years, I've learned one thing: only power can keep what you want to keep. And only power can control women like you who crave vanity. I forcefully turned my face away, breaking free of his grip, and laughed coldly in mockery. But power controls you too, otherwise you wouldn't have married Bronte Collington. Wilfred didn't get angry. Instead, he gently smoothed my hair. There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. To get something, you always have to pay a price. I accept that. Winifred Farley, you need to accept it too. He spoke the cruelest words in the gentlest tone. I don't know where I found the strength, but I pushed him away and stood up. It's not necessary anymore. The choice you spoke of, my mother has already made it for me. 10 days ago, my mother found my depression diagnosis papers at home. After learning the truth about my depression, she jumped from the top floor of our apartment building without hesitation. She left me only a few words: "I'm sorry, darling. Mom has let you down." I came to see Dr. Ingoldsby today intending to apologize to him in person, but it seems that's no longer necessary. To stop you from manipulating me, she killed herself. Are you satisfied now? Wilfred Barlow stood there shocked, trying desperately to find any trace of a lie on my face. I turned and left the tea house. He didn't follow me. When I returned to the company, I noticed all the employees were looking at me with strange and sympathetic expressions. Once I got back to my office, my assistant hesitantly urged me to check my email immediately. The most recent message in my inbox was a group email. When I clicked the link, that familiar video appeared before my eyes again. In the video, I was naked, being repeatedly by 5 men. If I could, I would never want to see this video again in my life. Yet Bronte Collington kept reopening the wounds buried in my heart, over and over again. She knew this was a powerful weapon against me, and each use left me bleeding profusely. Winifred. Aubrey Arkwright anxiously burst into my office, but he was ultimately too late. Don't worry, I've already had the IT department block it completely. All employees have been ordered to keep quiet. It absolutely won't spread outside the company. I looked up at him. His lips were trembling, he really did seem very flustered. Seeing no reaction from me, he continued his analysis. Bronte Collington, it must have been her. She and Wilfred Barlow announced their engagement this morning, so she's acting recklessly. Let's get a divorce, I interrupted him. He thought he had misheard, blinking in disbelief. Aubrey Arkwright, let's get a divorce, I repeated. Aubrey grew agitated, but why? I told you I don't mind at all. Bang! The office door was violently pushed open as Wilfred Barlow stormed in with a grim expression, followed by a bewildered assistant. I wasn't surprised at all and dismissed my assistant. Aubrey Arkwright stood in front of me, on high alert. To what do we owe the pleasure of your visit, Mr. Barlow? He asked warily. This is between her and me. Step aside. Wilfred Barlow attempted to force his way through. But Aubrey didn't budge an inch, his demeanor equally imposing. Mr. Barlow, please conduct yourself. Winifred is my wife. The tension between the two men was palpable, both refusing to yield, seemingly on the verge of physical confrontation. Just say what you came to say, I interjected impatiently, breaking the deadlock. Wilfred's eyes were filled with anguish as he hesitated to speak. The video, was it Bronte Collington's doing? I wasn't surprised, I had long known he had people inside Farley Group. Mr. Barlow, with your far-reaching influence, you could easily find out. Why put on this act of asking me? I scoffed, years of forcibly suppressed resentment gradually surfacing. If it weren't for him, Bronte would never have resorted to such despicable means against me. How could I not hate him? To my surprise, his usually dominant and overbearing demeanor crumbled in an instant. His eyes reddened, and the sharp aura around him suddenly weakened, gradually replaced by a sense of desolate brokenness. The child, our child. For the first time, he revealed such vulnerability in front of others, like an eagle stripped of its proud bones. My heart inexplicably ached, yet I couldn't hold back my sharp words. Yes, your child was lost because of such vile tactics. My words pierced his heart like a sharp blade. The shock was evident on his face. Impossible! His bloodshot eyes resembled those of a desperate beast, as if determined to perish with me. Why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you tell me? Why? One of the assailants was a bone marrow match for her mother. How could she go to the police? With her mother's life at stake? Aubrey roared, shoving him against the wall. Besides, there was no evidence proving Bronte Collington was behind it. Reporting it would only put those hired thugs in jail for a few years. But what about the money for her mother's treatment? Would you provide it, Mr. Barlow? Aubrey's towering interrogation hit him like a heavy punch, leaving him speechless. He clutched his chest tightly, seemingly suppressing intense pain within. So, the money for your mother's treatment back then, it was from Bronte Collington? His lips trembled as he spoke. I laughed. Yes, it was her charity. Do you know? Actually, before we broke up, I already knew your true identity. Wilfred's face turned pale. You know very well that without that money, my mother won't survive. You also know how important she is to me, he said. But you, for the sake of your pitiful pride, would rather watch me sink into endless despair than lower your head to your family and help me with this favor. I was afraid my family wouldn't approve of us. He tried to explain, but the words caught in his throat halfway through. I knew he couldn't explain it. Because his concern about his family not accepting me was real. And his unwillingness to swallow his pride and help me was also real. You're afraid that once I know your true identity, I'll only be with you for your money, aren't you? I said bitterly. Sensitive, suspicious, and distrustful. I never thought someone like you would one day be on your knees begging me not to leave. I laughed self-mockingly. That day when I saw you kneeling in the snow, desperately begging me not to go, do you know how satisfying it felt? Wilfred, you should leave. Our fate ended 8 years ago. Wilfred Barlow called, saying he wanted to see me. I flatly refused. But then he gave the project I had fought so hard for to Farley Group. Seeing his sincerity, I agreed to meet. I just didn't expect him to bring Bronte Collington, wanting her to apologize to me. I found it laughable. What kind of apology could make up for years of torment? Moreover, she started hurling abuse as soon as she saw me. Winifred Farley, you promiscuous liar. What nonsense have you been telling Wilfred to make him treat me like this? I studied her impassively. She wore a white chiffon dress that accentuated the shocking rope marks and bruises on her neck and wrists. My first thought was that Wilfred had been quite merciful to me. My second was relief at having left this man with violent tendencies early on. I only stated the facts, I replied. It was you who debased yourself, begging me for money to slap. Wilfred struck her hard across the face. The force was so great, I wondered if he had deafened her. Bronte clutched her swollen cheek, glaring at him defiantly. If your heart wasn't set on this harlot, if you'd even look at me, I wouldn't have stooped to opposing her. It's all because of you. She laughed maniacally. It's all because of you, Wilfred. All her suffering was caused by you. Wilfred seemed stung by her words. Enough. We're engaged now, so why did you release that video publicly? I didn't. It wasn't me. You're still lying. Wilfred raised his hand to strike again. It wasn't her, I suddenly spoke up. It was me. Wilfred turned to me in disbelief. I had the video released, I said. Bronte cackled, so you're even crazier than me. Why? Wilfred asked, confused. But I released an AI-generated version. Tomorrow, Farley Group's PR department will debunk it as maliciously fabricated. Now even if someone releases the real video, no one will believe it. When the fake seems real, the real seems fake. I walked up to Bronte and calmly said, I won't give you any more chances to hurt me. Blood trickled from Bronte's lips, but she kept laughing hysterically. You couldn't beat me 8 years ago, and you can't beat me now. Just you wait. The world fell silent once more. I received a text message from Dulcie's father. Miss Farley, please don't go to River Meadow Manor tomorrow. Bronte Collington has set a trap for you there. Just as I finished reading the text, I got a call from Aubrey Arkwright. He said, Winifred, I agreed to the divorce. Let's meet at River Meadow Manor tomorrow at 3 p.m. to sign the papers. I smiled and said, all right. After hanging up, I threw my prenatal checkup report into a rubbish bin on the street. The next afternoon, I arrived as agreed. Aubrey had someone send me a room key card. I went to the door according to the room number. I still didn't want to believe my judgment of men could be so poor. I wanted to give him one last chance. So I asked 2 plainclothes officers I knew to have a coffee in the lobby first. I swiped the card and opened the door, then froze at the sight before me. There were 5 men and 1 woman in the room, but no Aubrey. I took out my mobile to call the officers. Officer, there's a gathering in room 3007. As a disheveled Bronte Collington was being led away. She saw Aubrey embracing me outside the door and started screaming hysterically at us. Aubrey, how dare you help this witch set me up? Winifred Farley, I curse you. When I get out, I'll. Some people are truly strange. I merely treated her the way she treated me, yet she became so enraged and couldn't accept it. You're not getting away with this, I said calmly. I've submitted all the evidence to the police about you orchestrating my rape 8 years ago. Along with the 5 perpetrators who are all willing to testify against you. Rubbish! I covered my tracks perfectly. There can't be any evidence, and those 5 men would never testify against me. You're bluffing. You may have bought their silence with money, but I can certainly pay them to tell the truth. Bronte Collington's eyes widened in shock. Impossible. How dare you go to the police? Don't you care about your mother's life? I slapped her hard across the face. I thought to myself, no wonder Wilfred couldn't restrain himself from hitting this madwoman. Bronte screamed hysterically, shrieking that she would tear me to pieces. But she was firmly restrained and couldn't move. You can retain the right to sue me, but you have no right to speak of my mother, I said, my voice slightly choked. Hearing the emotion in my voice, Aubrey pulled my face against his chest. With him here, I felt I could break down and cry freely at any moment. I wasn't afraid of losing face in front of my enemy because he could help me maintain my composure. Bronte Collington, you and Wilfred Barlow schemed and plotted. But you failed to account for a mother's deep love for her daughter. Ms. Glass is gone now. You have no more leverage to threaten us with. Before taking her own life, my mother left a note compelling me to go to the police, saying she couldn't rest in peace otherwise. Aubrey, you ungrateful traitor, helping her plot against me. Aren't you afraid of divine retribution? Don't celebrate too soon. If you use my own tactics against me, you'll all end up in prison with me. Aubrey suddenly let go of me, and I had a sinking feeling. Prison is nothing. I'll serve time with you, consider it repayment for when you covered my mother's medical bills years ago. Aubrey left me and walked away with the police. Dulcie's father, who had appeared at some point, went with them as well. I was left standing there alone, stunned. Dulcie's father was the one who had donated bone marrow to my mother all those years ago. The news of Bronte Collington's illegal activities had been trending for a long time, and their videos were being shared frantically across the internet. Collington Group's stock plummeted. A month later, Barlow Corporation announced the cancellation of their marriage alliance with the Collington family. Collington Group's stock market completely collapsed, and they declared bankruptcy and restructuring. All of this should have been my plan, but all my electronic devices were clean, leaving no trace behind. Aubrey Arkwright became the mastermind, taking responsibility for all the charges in court, and was sentenced to 12 years. I finally understood that he had been silently protecting me in his own way all along. I went to visit Bronte Collington in prison. In just a short month, she seemed to have aged 10 years and appeared somewhat deranged. She asked in confusion why Dulcie's father would help me betray her. He was supposed to be her most loyal subject. I said, perhaps it's because he had a daughter. I went to see Aubrey as well. He seemed very uncomfortable facing me. Initially, he approached me, saying he had been hurt by Bronte Collington like I had, and wanted to join forces with me to plan our revenge. That's how we met. I told him that I knew from the beginning that he was sent by Bronte Collington. But if it wasn't him, it would have been someone else, so I pretended not to know. I just didn't expect that sometimes when you deceive me and I deceive you, real feelings can still develop. I actually knew you were always giving me sleeping pills. But I poured them out when you weren't looking, he hurriedly explained. I saw that you often couldn't sleep well at night. I wasn't trying to harm you. I couldn't help but tease him. How did you know I often couldn't sleep well? As far as I know, except for that one time when we were drunk, we've never slept in the same room. He blushed, looking slightly embarrassed. I know you were worried about me, but I still didn't drink them. Do you know why? Why? He looked like a dazed little deer, incredibly adorable. My heart skipped a beat. Because you are my sleeping pill. It turns out that when you meet the right person, sweet words really do come naturally. His face turned even redder. So embarrassed he looked like he wanted to dig a hole and hide in it right then and there. But the corners of his mouth, turned up high, betrayed him. So you knew all along? I told him some good news. Farley Group has successfully overcome its crisis. Barlow Corporation has given us a project worth over £100 million. It's Wilfred Barlow, you and him. He asked cautiously, making me feel very sorry for him. Mr. Arkwright, we are still legally married. And I currently have no intention of signing divorce papers. You have every right to ask about my relationship with Wilfred Barlow. His eyes immediately lit up. Do you still like him? No, but he owes me and is willing to compensate. I don't see anything wrong with that. You and I have both been driven into poverty due to lack of money. We know very well that pride doesn't put food on the table, and money in hand is what's truly useful. But if you mind. Can I mind? Of course. Then I don't mind anymore. He smiled happily, like a child who had just received a gold star. Sunlight filtered through the iron bars on the window, falling on his slightly tired but spirited face. He's so handsome, I thought to myself. How come I never noticed before? I took out the baby's 4D ultrasound picture from my bag and said to him softly, "The baby and I will wait for you to come out."